Hi, this is Rick, and I'm doing a prefix to introduce this video. The video you're about to watch is really to give answers to. I mean, so many people are hearing about Planet X and Nibiru and all that, and the science involved gets over their head. This is to break some of that down and to show the correlation between that and the prophecies and that kind of thing. Hello, again, Rick Norris here, normally working under the channel name Last Call. Sometimes I work under my own name. I'm a recording artist by trade, but that has nothing to do with this here. If you like blues, where it meets rock and roll, a little bit of gospel, and just go to ricknorrismusic.net. Again, that's not the concern here, though. We're going to be talking about what's really going on. There's been a lot of talk about the deep state thing and, the conspiracies. And, of course, YouTube, there's so many people up there trying to hype it, manipulate it, sensationalize some of the stuff that's going on, and that people just, their eyes glass over and they don't listen. And, we're in a time where we're inoculated. We get so much information we just, can't assimilate. Well, some of those conspiracies have empirical evidence, and there's actual data to back them up. And with the waters, social and the media water so muddy from all the information, it's a problem. This particular slide I have up now, you really need to think about this. Like I said, we get so much information we can't assimilate. We have just had 5 1,000-year floods in less than a year. I mean, if you think about that, that says it all. What in the world is going on our little crazy planet? Well, and if you've been on YouTube and looked at any of this stuff at all, you know that the oceans are receding. And it's not a tidal thing. Has nothing to do with the tides. We are wobbling. The earth is wobbling, and that's a prophetic thing. The Bible says that in these last days that the earth will wobble like a drunkard and shake like a hut in the wind. That's one of the prophecies. And there's a reason for all of that, and we're going to talk about that. What you're looking at is the movement of the actual zero magnetic pole. It's all over the map, and it's supposed to be stationary for the most part. And so, I mean, all of the graphs, there's a lot of resources out there that your tax money pays for. You can go look at, do your own research. Look at this. It's like a spiral, It's like we're wobbling and we're being drawn and perturbed. That is the astronomical terminology. We're perturbed. Our gravitational and electromagnetic poles are being moved. And of course, the logical question is, what's moving them? What in the world is making our little sphere dance around like this? And well, it's really quite simple. The answer is quite simple, but it's in another sense very complicated, because it deals with the movement of the planets, what they call Kepler's laws of planetary motion and that kind of thing. But you don't have to be an astronomical genius to know what's going on the planet. I mean, the increase, what you're looking at here is the exponential over-the-top amount of earthquakes that have happened. And, look at one on the right there. It's just one day. Simultaneously, as most folks know, the ring of fire, that is the volcanic ring that is in the Pacific there, it's going off. I mean, there's just no way to say it. It is absolutely boiling, and we've got an increase of dormant volcanoes that's also exponential. I mean, these things have been quiet for centuries, and they're going off. I mean, all over the planet, and so the increase in volcanism is just as astonishing. And again, of course, the logical question is what's causing it? What's making the volcanoes all go off? And there's some very plain and simple answers. Again, the science behind it is complicated, but the answer is quite straightforward. What was discovered some rather recently by historical scientific standards is and simultaneously there's a large part of the community, scientific community, that won't receive anything until after it's just overwhelmed with it, because the status quo is their funding and all of that. So they'll poo-poo a lot of things and try to badmouth anything new because they need their status quo to get their funding and so on for their research. It's just like politics. It's horrible. But the point is, some time ago, they discovered unambiguously that there is a direct connection between cause and effect, is a better way of putting it, between our sun, what's going on the face of the sun, and the earthquakes and volcanism and seismic activity that's obviously we were just talking about. So what you're looking at here, this is a report, a scientific report that from the USGS, no less, that is actually working from the accepted fact that research is an axiom now. It's an accepted thing. So what it says, of course, is that two major earthquakes, poles apart, struck the Ring of Fire last night. A magnitude 6.3 hit the Balleny Island region of the Antarctic, and a mag 6.6 hit the Boulder Island, Alaska. The Alaskan quake was very deep. And anyway, it says last night's quake is the third major quake in 24 hours, which comes as a major coronal hole has opened on our sun. See picture below. I don't know how that got cropped. But anyway, it is well known now that coronal holes and solar activity do influence earthquake, volcano activity, and hurricanes on our planet. And with the Ring of Fire flexing its muscles recently, the next few days should be interesting. Anyway, so that clip pretty much speaks for itself. The scientific community is now coming to grips with the fact that the theories about coronal holes in our sun are in fact validated now. The status quo that you run into in the meteorological community and the weather news, weather people, and all that stuff, they're bucking. They have their own status quo. It's just amazing. The data is overwhelming, and yet some of those folks are still clinging to the old models. What you're looking at here is sources. We're going to talk about what is really going on here. Many years ago, there was a man named Lowell who discovered the controversial and much ballyhooed Planet X, or Planet 9, as NASA likes to call it. And the truth is, they discovered it that long ago. I mean, it was like the 50s or before the 50s, and then later there was another. And there was Dr. Ferrata, and there was Dr. Harrington, who was the head of the Naval Space Observatory. One of the main, he was the head guy of one of their space administration units, and they were so sure, he was so sure, he wrote a white paper, and they followed up on it and actually sent out 3 probes. In 77 they sent out, in 72 they sent out the Pioneer, and they sent it one direction in the universe, and then they sent the other 2 south of the universe, which does not mean south like our compass. And they triangulated it. They found it out there, what was disturbing the planets, what was moving the planets around. That's how they knew that it's what's called perturbing, which I mentioned. So they triangulated it, that is, they located it, and it was all the science mags, Popular Science, and all the space science mags, astronomy books, all started having articles about the fact that they had found Planet 9 or its equivalent, or they were pretty sure that's what it was. But it was there. And then here's this particular slide is a vindication of that validation, if you will. It's a little redundant, but you see the publishing date there, publishing date being 1987, 89. And this is an example of what was going on. And many of those publications, the older ones that can be found, they're no longer in print, I'm sure. But it have the articles, newspapers, it was everywhere. So it was big news, and NASA gave that release that I showed just prior to this clip. I'll bring that back up. So there were other releases and articles that were not, I can't really validate here, but here is something from NASA, literally, that I showed before. It releasing in 1992 the fact that what they have here is unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer solar system body of 4 to 8 times Earth's mass on a highly tilted orbit beyond 7 billion miles from the sun. What inadvertently they showed just how fast this thing is moving. I mean, this thing is screaming. It is just it's screaming through space, and it's coming at us. It traveled 43 billion miles in 10 years, coming right at us. Now, keep in mind that this release is, pretty plain and pretty straightforward, but what they're not saying is the fact that they had already validated all of this. They already knew everything they needed to know. And that truth has now come to light and is being more vindicated every day. With you've got several million amateur astronomers out there, and they're all seeing this thing come in, and they knew about the perturbations. That is what they call here unexplained deviations. Decades ago, and NASA already knew by this time everything that was going on, and they're playing it down. And there are many theories as to why they began even before 1992 to obfuscate and to be covert about it, and everybody went silent after this. I mean, it was not another word. And if you talked about it, they would claim that you needed a, tinfoil hat. So there's been all this covert crap going on, and the truth is they had this thing wired. And I think, one of the main theories is they just didn't want the public to panic, at the knowledge that this thing's coming right at us. And now they've, perpetuated this covert lie thing for so long. They're in so deep now they can't get out, and it helps because if the public panics, of course, the banking system goes down, and they have their agenda too. So, and as I spoke of, there are so many amateur astronomers with good equipment and good gear, that have seen all this stuff happening and all the anomalies in the heavens. I mean, it's undeniable that, and then you see the signs on the earth too. It's undeniable that we're being perpetrated ourselves. We're under the influence of this binary, our evil twin, if you will. P7X, as I like to call it, because Gil Broussard has got the best data of anyone out there. Gil Broussard, Planet 7X, look him up. You want to find out what's really going on. That's amazing data there. Excuse me. And now, this slide you're looking at is obviously a retraction. This is their subtle way of retracting, legally retracting what they had released before. And, you can see it pretty much speaks for itself. And once they realize that this thing's coming right at us, and the potential for destruction is so replete, that they just decided they were going to go ahead and perpetuate the lie and prepare themselves. And we could get into that, but that's a whole other video. They've gone underground. They've been building underground, and they're leaving us kind of holding the bag when this thing comes in. And that sounds like a conspiracy, fantastious thing in its own right, but the data and the info is out there. And Cat is pretty much out of the bag on all that. Now, if you look here, they start with the original released information in 92, and unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer solar system body, and so on. And then they say this archive is missing from the press releases from 1990 through 1994. How convenient. Though the archive ostensibly links to those files. We are working to resolve the problem and apologize for any inconvenience. NASA website editor's note. Yeah, and I'm the Pope. Anyway, I think we have now. Recently, they got one of their scientists, quote unquote, up there, Dr. Morrison. And I mean, this guy lied about everything. It was astonishing. He was condescending and arrogant about it, and even used colloquialisms. It was pretty. It was a travesty, just an actual crime in the making. In fact, I think we have a picture. I have a picture of that interview with Dr. Morrison. Yes, there it is. And as I've shared in other videos, I have a white paper on that report. In science, of course, the science as you have what's called white papers, and that the researchers and discoveries are released on. It's a formal way of declaring your discovery. I'll get that up here. Yep, that's the one. Strange letterhead there, but anyway, that pretty much sums up what they've been doing for quite some time now, and it's a heartbreaker, but it's the truth. I know it's terribly corny, but it makes the point. Now, where we're going, I'm going to shift gears now and kind of get into what's really going on here, because whether you're thinking about the deep state or you're thinking about governmental conspiracies and obfuscation and covert operations and conspiracies in the deep state or any of that, it's all really, even at the deepest point here on terra firma, it is still the result of some other puppet strings that go even higher, and I want to address that. Now, if you look at this slide we have here, it's obviously a quote from Ephesians, the book of Ephesians, and this is where you find that big giant word, Greek word, kosmokratopos, and it really translates the rulers of darkness of this world, and that's a really good rendering for that particular word, and that's really what we're up against. You talk about the man behind the curtain. This is where you find that big word, kosmokratopos. Love that word, but not what it represents. That translates, a good translation for that, a good rendering for that is rulers of darkness of this world. Very good depiction of that, good rendering. And so that's really what we're up against. If you read Ephesians here, it says, "For we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places." And this has realms, same thing. But the point is that there's a really good question, and that is, what is spiritual forces of wickedness or evil doing in heavenly places? Actually, the answer to that, it really opens up into a huge discussion, teaching, whatever you want to call it. And if you look at the original languages, like I was just discussing with that huge word, there's some other huge words there, naming some of the other entities that are involved in that whole thing. Now, the bottom line is Satan hates your guts, wants to kill you. You're in a crossfire. This is real, and science actually proves the Bible. Now, you say that to most folks nowadays, and they're just astonished, But it's common knowledge in the scientific community that a lot of the stuff, that the status quo, that the Darwinists and Big Bangers cling to and perpetuate, is really the product of decades of being indoctrinated and by the status quo again, and or a bias that's predicated on a desire to just not acknowledge anything spiritual, and they dig their heels in, and they can't get their funding in many cases, so it's a lot of times it's that too. If they don't toe the line, then they lose their funding for research, that kind of thing. And some time ago, I covered a lot of this stuff with Rex Bear over at Leak Project, and did about a 3-hour interview with him, and it was he divided it into two and put one on his site and kept one in the public domain, more accessible. At any rate, I go into all of this stuff, and this slide that you have up here, obviously a quote from Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament and heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, days and years." And I mentioned earlier Gil Broussard in his astronomy, not astrology. Astrology is a perversion of astronomy, and that's another teaching altogether too. But Gil Broussard discovered the correlation and confirmation and parallel chronology that the biblical accounts and the scientific, that is, the astronomical events in history lined up so perfectly and astonishingly. You need to go check him out. His videos, well, he's done interviews with everyone. Nobody has data like Gil Broussard, and his main channel, I think, is Planet 7X .net, and go check him out. But the best interview I've ever seen him do was with Caravan to Midnight. That is Mr. Wells over there. And go back to the archives, get the very first interview he did with Gil. It's just as good as it gets. And he will amaze you. It's astonishing. Now, the slide you're looking at now is from an excerpt from one of the white papers that Dr. Claudia Albert put out. She is a professional physicist and astronomer, and many other things. She's a genius, anyway you look at it. And she's been putting out a series of white papers to challenge NASA, basically. And the photography is the satellite images, the telescope and satellite imagery is over the top. It's hard to describe how good it is. And she very matter-of-factly goes into what's really going on, and she doesn't bother herself with the debunkers or the trolls or any of that. She's just a scientist, and she knows what she knows and found it. she's very black and white on the issues, and you'll see why when you listen to her. The reason I put this slide up is this is a good example of what I mean. She she's very matter-of-factly explaining that these, like what she calls the blue stellar core, I'm sure many would call it the blue Kachina, but she very matter-of-factly states what's going on. We have a failed star. It's a stellar core, which is the same thing, a sun that went out, if you will. And she shares quite plainly what she has discovered, and it's unambiguous. And she says, well, these cores are approaching the sun. There's a plasma exchange, plasma discharge between them, an exchange. The failed stars that come in. I mean, people that are into astronomy are seeing these things around the sun daily now. I mean, it's everywhere. And NASA still, is accusing them of, again, needing a tinfoil hat. But anyone that's doing any homework or actual science or research is seeing this stuff. And she's got this stellar core picture of this full-blown blue stellar core drawing plasma from the sun. And she's explaining that, and that there's a symbiotic kind of an exchange that goes on there. It's amazing. So here's this matter-of-fact data coming in, right? It's awesome. Now, lately we've been seeing all types of eclipsing going on out through the telescopes and from the satellite feed, and then whenever there's something like that, some kind of object comes into contact with the sun or reveals itself, or a CME lights it up and you can see it. NASA will cut the feed at the International Space Station or whatever the satellite is. And then, when somebody, actually has doesn't have to go to the archives and actually catches it before they can cut the feed, then they explain it away as, oh no, that was the moon, or that was they'll just make something up. They always do. For most of the last, couple decades, it's been sun flare. Everything's a sun flare, sundog. There are so many examples, way too many to go into in this video, and I've got to wrap this up. I don't want to go too long. But here's one. I mean, obviously when they had, on August 21st, when we had the eclipse, suddenly, because of the indirect light and the way the eclipse took place, it illuminated an object just below it. You can see it there. This is, if you go to the Alaskan weather cams, actually the weather cameras all over the world, they're capturing this stuff coming in and out. A lot of times when you have what's called SOHO, some of the Core 2 shots and stuff, these are satellite resources that you can go, your tax dollars paid for it. You can go online and look at this stuff. You'd be looking at the sun from so many angstroms, what they call the magnification or the filter that's on there, and you'll see some small object orbiting or moving into the corona, actually drawing plasma, it's become commonplace. I mean, it's happening regularly, and of course the mainstream won't cover it. That's your Cosmocratopos kicking in. They've got pretty strong control on the media. Even your daytime cameras and your nighttime observations and cameras. I'm talking about weather cameras and that kind of stuff. They're everywhere. All your airports, and there's really a myriad of them. So that's the data. It's an FAA type camera. I mean, they can't fake it. I've seen them cut that feed too on a regular basis and go back and edit their archives to keep people from finding out. Again, they don't want the public to panic and destroy the banking system. So that's the main motivation. We hope. I mean, it could be much darker than that, of course. And obviously there is a myriad of theories as to just how dark it is, and how, even satanic, since the Luciferian thing is now coming to light as well. But The point is, evidence like what we're looking at right here is just pouring in from all over the world, and these FAA cameras and the amateur astronomers and the professionals now are all understanding that they are hiding this stuff. But these signs in the heavens, I mean, and I'll show more in a second, line up with, of course, the quotes from Revelation and the Gospels. Obviously here in Luke 21:5 through 28, it says, and there shall be signs in the sun and the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for looking after those things that are coming upon the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken, and then they shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And there's that word signs again, and you see that all through the Gospels and the accounts of Revelation. The signs, the reason there's signs is, he's trying to wake folks up. What you're looking at here is another example of wonderful work by a guy named Jeff P., who does great work. He's just really, really good. Works closely with Steve Olson as well. But Steve Olson, Gil Broussard, Jeff P., some of these folks are just amazing. Now, I'm going to replay this in a moment here, but what you just saw was what nearly everyone now in the scientific community, astronomical community, is beginning to believe, that there is an actual sun simulator. And we actually have patents that show how they made it. It's all out in the open now. What he did, or whoever sent this in, you have one of your cameras. It starts off, you see an object next to the so-called sun. I won't get into that. But the sun comes over and, illuminates again. You'll see the cursor come up. And there's an object there. And then now what's amazing is, as the sun goes the other direction, this object becomes very obvious, but it becomes obvious from a light source completely off to the other side of where the so-called sun is headed. And so how is this thing lit? How can this thing be lit on this side, on the left side there, if the sun went the other direction? So this is another example of how the scientific community, that is the status quo, NASA and them, keep tilting their cards and dropping their left, as they say in the ring. And you can see through it all. And the general public has been conditioned for so long to slowly but surely through the media to mock anything that's, has to do with any of this, and that, everybody's been, slandered and trolled. It's really bad. So that now when they see something like this, it just all sounds paranoid to many. What you're looking at here is very important. The recent sign that the whole world was privy to, because there's never been anything like it, and nor will there ever be. And that's the sign of the birthing Jupiter going retrograde into Virgo, and the constellations lining up to give that sign that Virgo was the Virgin constellation was giving birth, and the planet that entered that area to represent the king was the king planet, which is Jupiter. And it was just astonishing. The more you look into it, the more it's got to be divine. But what you're looking at here in the top left corner of this particular slide is the actual infrared picture of the what they call P7X or Planet X, and like I said, NASA likes to call it Planet 9. They actually nailed the thing down at one point, and one of the amateur astronomers, and And it's called the fiery red dragon of old in Scripture. Now you see why. That line that looks like a happy face, the smile underneath it, is really a debris trail that goes back millions of miles. And Google and the powers that be were so threatened by this particular capture that they blacked it out. You see where the arrows point, it was blacked out in the constellation. And I'll show you some more evidence of that here in just a moment. Now the red is actually the real color, because it's what you're dealing with is iron oxide, which is commonly found with a failed star, which is what you're looking at. Now, some of the other evidence, let me put some of that up here in just a minute. But you see where they just blacked it out. If you drop back, you get a better shot of what they did. This shows the constellation Virgo, and then many people were talking about the birthing and all the different constellations, stars. Jupiter had to go retrograde, which is astonishing. It went backwards in its orbit and stayed between the legs, if you will, of Virgo to represent the birthing for exactly 42 months, which is exactly the established gestation period for a human child. So, gee, I wonder, and most retrograde motion of the planets is very quick, very, very quick, and it only lasts for a moment. So this was intentional, a divine intervention. And now here's a close-up of that particular obfuscation, that blocking they were doing. Now in 1054, the Chinese actually documented this thing coming in, and they called it the guest star. If you go to Gil Broussard's, again, I mentioned him earlier, his data shows that, the secular reports of this thing coming in. So they saw all this stuff coming in, and they didn't have even close to the gear we have. They weren't even in the ballpark. But, with what they had, if they could see it, it just shows all of the obfuscation that's going on and the blockage and the misinformation that the status quo is putting out at this time. In two of my videos, I mentioned Dr. David Morrison, who is the senior scientist at NASA Astrobiology Institute. He completely and totally contradicts himself. I don't know. He's one of their talking heads, and he knows how to play the game. He's just jumping through their hoops. But here it says today, this is a quote from him who, he just very arrogantly put down anyone and everyone that believes, the evidence that's now coming in, and we're showing you. I say we, there's people all over YouTube, all over the planet now, news agencies, that are seeing the evidence, and it's coming forth. So, but here he says the opposite. Here, the other report, he condescended and just poo-pooed it all, and he just contradicts himself here. He says, today there are thousands of amateur astronomers and privately funded astronomers who can surpass NASA. What? I love it. And he acknowledges here that, you're quoting, NASA and the government get most of their information from these outside astronomers, not the other way around. Well, and the fact of the matter is they'll only pick and choose what they want to put out there. And right now we're in a season of soft disclosure. They're getting you ready for a huge deception that the government themselves are going to perpetuate. And we'll get into that in another video. There's been a lot of talk about the debris trail behind this binary system that has come in. That is, Planet X has an entourage. There's a bunch of small planets and or moons, and then there's, like I said, a few million miles of debris, because the thing is so electromagnetic, it drags stuff in wherever it goes. Now that's going to create what's called fiery hail and or raining down meteors and meteorites, and the government knows that. They've been hiding this from us. That's coming. This quote you're looking at in Revelation, it's about Wormwood. Wormwood is only mentioned once in the book of Revelation. Quote, the third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from heaven on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. And the name of the star was Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Now, this particular quote is really referring to an asteroid that has fallen to Earth in this case, which is very soon to happen. And as paranoid and or conspiratory or extra ethereal as that might sound, the data is everywhere concerning the meteors, the exponential increase in what they call NEOs, which is near-Earth objects, and I'll show you some of that. For starters, this is what a normal, this is from a site called livemeteors.com, and you can set, again, your tax dollars, your resources are out there. You can research any of this stuff on your own. You can watch meteors coming in. These are radio frequency responses, like a ping, what they call a ping. And when you have a meteor come in, that is what it looks like, one little blip like that. And you go, and there's also some audio that goes with it that's very interesting to watch. I mean, this stuff enters our atmosphere and is, of course, burned up for the most part. I mean, Russia found out they don't all burn here recently, didn't they? You will notice the debris has increased exponentially. It's multiplied, quite heavily. I saw this back in July, and it covered the whole screen, and that's unprecedented. I mean, what it comes down to is it turns out that some of these other objects in the group, in the debris, the asteroids that are going to fall according to the Bible, and these other NEO reports that are coming in now, that some of these objects have their own debris trail, so that obviously increases the potential for, that fiery hail, as it's called, and the meteor showers that actually hit Earth. Now, people who follow how all of this information, how science, astronomy, and everything proves the Bible, and like I always say what you want about the wise men in the Christmas story. They came to greet the Lord. Well, they were astronomers. They were Chaldean astronomers. And say what you want about them, the Bible calls them wise. The reason it's not difficult, as difficult to harvest white-tailed deer from a tree stand during deer season is because they never look up. Now, so, that's why I'm doing this video, trying to get people to, consider what's really happening here. Now, in the first trumpet sounding, according to Revelation 8:7, which is a continuation of the judgments that are coming on the earth, it says, and hail and fire followed, mingled with blood, and they were thrown down to the earth. And a third part of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Even a little bit of homework, and you see how some of these things, he actually repeats himself. When God repeats himself, he's trying to tell you something. A lot of people have prophetic dreams, and they don't know what it is. They keep having the same dream, and it's just like, hello, come in over. Anyway, so there's going to be a meteor shower, unprecedented meteor shower. You see that during Joshua's long day, the battle he had with the Assyrians. You go and look at, again, Gil Broussard's data. He shows the correlations and corroborations and miraculous lineup between some of the biblical miracles and this the heavenly signs and influences such as we're talking about. Now, so the Meteor, livemeteor.com, go check that out, because this thing is going off the charts. And that's part of the thing. If you look at the NEO charts, that is Near Earth Object charts, they are so exponentially busier with objects coming in, and most of the time the powers that be and or NASA specifically they don't even see these things coming in. They go by us now. There's so many of them they can't even spot them. And some of them are not in the regular color spectrum and can only be seen with infrared. But these things are coming from all parts of the stadium, folks. And we are in a shooting gallery right now. And so all these things are lining up, and that's some of the heavenly signs that were to come, and this is all part of the prophecy. And we're coming down to the wire, and the reason I'm doing this is God's really crazy about you, us, and he came down, took the rap, and we are engraved in the palms of his hands. I mean, a lot of people say Christianity's a little narrow and stuff. No, it's just unique. And it's unique in a unique way. And that is that all the other religions of the world are, built on the systems of men and the cerebellums and ideas of men trying to reach God. And all the other religions are men trying to reach God. Well, Christianity is God trying to reach men. He has a plan. He has a system. What a concept, right? And we're so full of ourselves, so puffed up, we think we can do a better job. That's amazing to me. But anyway, so, this thing is going to get smoked, and it has to. I mean, look around, pedophilia, bestiality, abominable things beyond, belief. And, they're sacrificing children. This is really happening, and now they're finding it's on a huge scale at the top of the social rung. It's unbelievable. But anyway, so, men are capable of any kind of abomination, and God's just trying to reach folks and help us get a clue. And by the way, the blood mentioned in that scripture right there is really, the red comes from the iron oxide that comes with that big wrecking ball that's coming in with all of its entourage. Iron oxide is the failed star indication. It is the indicator that it is, in fact, a failed star. And this is pretty cutting edge discoveries that they're finding out about, how many failed stars there are and what the phases are and the star's life and the exoplanets. I mean, they're finding everything and discovering everything exponentially. I'll get into that more next time. This has gone quite long, and I want to wrap it up. Just know that, he's crazy about you, and he's doing everything he can to reach you, and many of you know it, and you're just running. And so anyway, until next time, just, be thinking about these things and go do some homework, do some research, look these resources up that I mentioned. And this is really happening, and you can verify it, okay? And until next time, and I'll get into this more and break it down more. Oh, and by the way, as I mentioned at the front end, I am a recording artist by trade. That's what I do for a living, and have since dirt, about 50 years, and mostly in the blues and rock and roll. But I've done just about everything you can do in the industry, from the White House to the ghetto and everything in between. If you like blues and old school R&B, rock and roll, right, where they synthesize Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of stuff, Hendrix, and that kind of thing, that's pretty much what I do. And you can go to ricknorrismusic.net and look around. I also do a lot of gospel, have always done gospel music as well, and helped pioneer CCM and, you know, and all that stuff back before it got, too commercial. It was very organic then, spontaneous. And we were just a bunch of criminals that God, came and blew our little game out of the water. And next thing we knew, we were doing what we were supposed to do in the first place. Anyway, go check it out, and God bless you. And I'll, like I said, I'll get into this more later. And again, ricknorrismusic.net if you want to look at some music, and it's all open. You don't have to purchase. You can listen to the whole tune if you just want to listen. If you want to buy something, that's up to you. Okay? God bless you.